She had worked for years, saving every dime, dreaming of the day she could finally turn that old fixer-upper into the home she'd always imagined. A place filled with light, laughter, and memories in the making. And when she finally found the perfect house, a quiet corner lot in a friendly-looking neighborhood, she thought her dreams were finally taking shape. She poured her heart into every detail, from the fresh white siding to the rose bushes she planted along the walkway. Friends would stop by and say the house looked like something straight out of a magazine. For the first time in years, she felt proud, like all her sacrifices had finally paid off. But then came the letter, folded neatly. In her mailbox was a notice from the HOA, the Homeowners Association. It said her new fence was not in compliance. Her freshly painted shutters were not approved. And the pergola she'd built for weekend barbecues? Apparently, that was a violation too. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a simple mix-up that would get sorted out with a quick phone call. But what followed was a steady stream of notices, meetings, and mounting fines. The same neighbors who once complimented her renovations were now silent. Or worse, siding with the HOA. She wasn't trying to break the rules. She just wanted a beautiful, comfortable home. But every time she tried to reason with the board, it felt like she was talking to a wall. They quoted bylaws and guidelines she had never seen. They said she needed permission for things already finished. And when she offered to adjust the designs, they shut her down again. It felt less like protecting the neighborhood and more like punishing her for daring to make something her own. The pressure didn't stop at paperwork. She started noticing things. Little things. A fine for a trash can left out 15 minutes. Too long. A complaint about music during her niece's birthday party. It was as if someone was watching her, just waiting for her to slip up again. Still, she refused to back down. This was her home, and she wasn't going to let a group of strangers dictate her dream, but just when she thought it couldn't get worse. Something happened that changed everything. It started with a knock on her door, early in the morning, just as she was finishing her coffee. A man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo stood outside holding a clipboard. He smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. He said he was there for a compliance inspection, which she didn't remember ever being scheduled. Confused but polite, she let him walk around the yard. He took pictures of everything, the new flower beds, the outdoor lights, even the custom mailbox her father had helped her build. When she asked if something was wrong, he simply said, "We'll be in touch." A few days later, another letter arrived. This one was more serious. It said she had 30 days to correct all violations or face legal action. Her heart dropped. Legal action? For what? Beautifying her home? She couldn't believe it. Every improvement she made was with care and respect for the neighborhood. It wasn't like she built a neon sign or started a construction site. It was just a pergola, some paint, and a bit of love. She didn't understand why they were targeting her. She began researching the HOA's rules, digging through old documents, minutes from meetings, anything she could find. That's when things started to get even stranger. Some of the rules they claimed she violated weren't even listed. Others had vague wording that could mean almost anything. And oddly enough, she noticed that a few homes nearby had similar updates. One even had the exact same shutters. But those homes didn't seem to be getting letters or warnings. Why her? She started asking questions, at meetings, around the neighborhood, even online. But people were hesitant to speak. Some offered sympathetic smiles but said nothing. Others warned her quietly that the HOA president had a history of holding grudges. A few whispered that once you land on the wrong side of the board, it's almost impossible to get back in their good graces. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. She kept her cool, stayed professional, and documented everything. But deep down, she was exhausted. This was supposed to be her sanctuary, her safe space, And now it felt like she was being watched and judged in her own yard. She didn't want to fight, but she wasn't going to let anyone steal the home she had worked so hard for. And then, just when she thought she understood the game, someone slipped a handwritten note under her door. It only had 5 words, but those 5 words changed everything. The note read, "You're not the only one." She stared at those words over and over, unsure whether to feel comforted or afraid. Who left it? What did it mean? She scanned her porch, her yard, even the neighbors. Windows, nothing. No signs of anyone watching. But now, the situation no longer felt like a simple back and forth over fence paint or shutters. This was something deeper. Someone else had felt the need to warn her, and in such a quiet, secretive way. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying everything: the fake smiles at the HOA meetings, the cold looks from neighbors who used to wave, and now this cryptic message. The next morning, she decided to follow the only lead she had. She remembered a house a few streets over, painted bright blue, had once been the talk of the neighborhood. The owner, a retired teacher named Mr. Dean, had added a greenhouse and a small wooden deck, only to suddenly remove them months later. She'd always thought he changed his mind. Now she wasn't so sure. When she knocked on his door, he looked surprised. But as soon as she mentioned the HOA, something in his expression shifted, like he understood. He invited her inside, sat her down, and slowly opened up. He told her how 2 years ago he'd gotten the same kind of letters. First about his garden, then the color of his mailbox, then the size of his deck railings. He tried to fight back, but gave up when the legal threats started piling up. "They wear you down," he said. "It's not about rules. It's about control." She left his house with a strange mix of fear and fire in her chest. So it wasn't just her. And if this had been happening for years, how many others had been pushed into silence? Back home, she began digging deeper. She filed a request to review public HOA financial records. She combed through past complaint forms. That's when she noticed something odd. Several violations seemed to target single women or older homeowners. A pattern was beginning to take shape, one that went far beyond landscaping disagreements. Meanwhile, her personal life was starting to suffer. Friends stopped coming by. Her niece's sleepovers were canceled after a neighbor called in a noise complaint that didn't happen. Even deliveries to her home were getting delayed, sometimes missing altogether. It felt like someone wanted to isolate her, break her down piece by piece. But the most disturbing moment came a few nights later, when her security camera picked up a shadow near her garage. A person, standing still, watching, and then vanished. She replayed the footage over and over, slowing it down, trying to make out a face, but the shadow stayed just out of the camera's reach. It wasn't an accident. Whoever it was had been careful, standing just far enough back to stay hidden. But their presence was clear. And now, it was personal. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not just judged by HOA rules, but truly watched, like someone was waiting for her to react, to slip, to give up. That night, she double-locked every door and left the porch lights on. Her phone stayed beside her pillow, but sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with thoughts. Who would go that far just over a fence or a pergola? What did the HOA really want? It couldn't just be about bylaws and guidelines anymore. There had to be something more. The next morning, she filed a formal complaint with the city about the HOA's behavior. It was a long shot, but she wasn't going to sit back quietly. While at City Hall, a clerk offhandedly mentioned that a few other residents from her community had visited over the last year, people asking similar questions. She asked if she could talk to them, but the clerk shook his head. Most of them moved out shortly after, he said. Didn't leave forwarding addresses. The words chilled her. Back in the neighborhood, the air felt heavier. Neighbors avoided eye contact. One woman she had once walked her dog with crossed the street the moment she saw her. And then, the next wave of letters arrived. 4 of them. One for a supposed broken gate hinge, one for non-compliant lighting, one accusing her of unapproved activity on her property, and the 4th, a certified letter, was a formal notice of legal proceedings for failure to comply. She took the letters, lined them up on her kitchen counter, and stared at them. This wasn't enforcement. This was a campaign. That same week, her internet started cutting out randomly. Her sprinklers, controlled by a smart system, kept switching on in the middle of the night. Her car alarm went off twice for no reason. None of it made sense, until she remembered something Mr. Dean said: "They find ways to make you feel crazy." Still, she kept pushing. She set up a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in HOA abuse cases. She collected witness statements and started building a paper trail. She even knocked on more doors, asking quietly, carefully, if anyone else had experienced the same. And then, one evening as she pulled into her driveway, she found her front door wide open. Her heart dropped the second she saw the door swinging open. She slammed the car into park and rushed inside, her phone already dialing 911. But as she stepped into the living room, something stopped her cold. Nothing was taken. Her TV, her laptop, the jewelry box, all untouched. But everything felt disturbed. A dining chair slightly pulled out. A picture frame tilted. The scent of her vanilla candle, which she hadn't lit in days, faintly lingering in the air. Someone had been inside, but they hadn't come to steal. They wanted her to know they were there. She backed out of the house slowly, phone shaking in her hand. The police arrived within minutes and swept the property, but with no sign of forced entry, they said there wasn't much they could do. Maybe a forgotten key under a mat, one officer suggested. But she knew better. She had changed every lock after the last round of HOA threats. Someone had access, and that was no accident. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat in her car outside her own home, engine running, lights off, just watching. Around midnight, a figure walked past her driveway, slow, deliberate, head low. She couldn't see their face, but they glanced toward her house. Then, just as quickly, disappeared into the dark. That was the moment she knew. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. Someone was targeting her directly. The next morning, she called her lawyer and told him everything. He was silent for a moment before asking if she had heard of quiet title disputes. She hadn't. He explained that in some rare cases, HOA board members have tried to push homeowners out through fines, intimidation, or even manipulation of obscure property clauses, just to seize control of properties they wanted for redevelopment or sale. At first, it sounded too far-fetched. But as she connected the dots, the letters, the silence from neighbors, the untraceable complaints, it started to make sense. This wasn't just harassment. It could be a setup. Then came the second twist. That afternoon, while digging through public real estate filings, she discovered something that made her chest tighten. A pending offer had been placed on her property, under a different name, but with an address that linked back to one of the HOA board members. The deal wasn't final, but the paperwork had been started weeks ago, before she ever received her first violation. Someone wasn't just trying to scare her, they were trying to take her home. She stood outside the HOA office building, the folder in her hand thicker than it had ever been. Emails, complaint records, audio clips, even photos of the board member linked to the shady real estate offer. This was her final move. She'd spent weeks gathering every shred of evidence, documenting every visit, every violation, every strange encounter. The plan was simple: file a formal complaint with the state's housing authority and go public if she had to. No more hiding. No more fear. Inside, the board was mid-meeting when she walked in. Conversations stopped. The room turned cold and all eyes locked on her. But she didn't flinch. She placed the folder on the table and calmly said, "This is everything. Every violation, every visit, every lie. I know what you're doing, and I'm not the only one." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just let the silence speak for itself. The board president, the same man tied to the offer on her home, smirked like he had nothing to worry about. But when she mentioned the state attorney's office had already been contacted and her lawyer was prepared to move forward with a lawsuit, his expression cracked. Other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and one even stood up and left the room. For the first time, the power shifted. Within days, the HOA suspended all pending violations against her. An internal review was launched, and not long after, the president quietly resigned. Rumors swirled about backdoor deals, property flips, and a history of targeting residents who didn't fall in line. The neighborhood finally began to talk again. A few residents even thanked her for standing up. And slowly, she started to feel peace return. But just when she thought the nightmare was over, one last twist came out of nowhere. A letter arrived. No return address, typed with no signature. It simply read, "You may have stopped him, but the game isn't over." She stared at it for a long time. It wasn't fear she felt anymore. It was clarity. This had never been just about her house. It was about standing up when it's easier to stay silent. And while she may have won this round, she now knew something far bigger had been hiding behind the rules. So, she locked the note in her drawer, picked up her tools, and went right back to working on her home, exactly the way she wanted. The weeks that followed were quieter. The anxiety that once clung to every knock at the door or unexpected letter slowly faded. The new HOA board, now under temporary leadership, reached out to her with an apology and promised to review their entire violation process. For the first time in months, her mornings started with coffee and the sound of birds, not dread. The yard, once watched so closely by others, became hers again. She planted new flowers, fixed the paint on the pergola, and even added a bench beneath the tree out front. People stopped to compliment her work again, this time without hesitation. She later learned that several other residents had also come forward after her public stand. Their stories were similar: unjust fines, unannounced inspections, quiet threats. It turned out the corruption within the HOA had been growing for years, but everyone had been too afraid to speak. Her actions helped spark change, not just in policy, but in spirit. The neighborhood had become more open, more united, and slowly, trust was being rebuilt. As for the letter with the warning, "The game isn't over," she chose not to let it control her. Maybe it was someone clinging to the old way of doing things, or maybe it was just meant to rattle her. Either way, she refused to live in fear anymore. She had already faced the worst and stood her ground. Whatever came next, she was ready. She also kept in touch with Mr. Dean, who had once given up hope. Inspired by her courage, he began rebuilding his greenhouse. Other neighbors started small projects of their own, reclaiming the right to make their homes feel like home. It wasn't about rebelling against rules. It was about finding a balance between community standards and personal freedom, something that had been lost along the way. Looking back, she never imagined a dream home renovation would turn into a battle with the HOA. But in fighting for her house, she found her voice. She learned that standing up doesn't always mean shouting. It can be quiet, steady, and persistent. And sometimes the strongest foundation isn't made of wood or stone, but of knowing you didn't back down when it mattered most.